the City Travel with Kids podcast, helping you plan big city trips with kids. Brought to you by Little City Trips.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for this week's City Travel with Kids podcast. I am your host, Marta Correale, and today we're talking all about Abu Dhabi. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Marianne Rogerson. Hi, Marianne. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
How are things in Sydney?
Cold and wet.
Oh, all right. Sounds like Dublin here. Well, today we're leaving the cold and wet, and we're going to be hearing all about Abu Dhabi. And we will be interviewing our own Little City Trips editor, Keri Hedrick, who lives in Abu Dhabi. And I kind of feel Abu Dhabi is perhaps a city that not many people have visited or even thought about visiting. I think nearby Dubai comes up a lot in, travel chats, but not Abu Dhabi quite as much. How about you, Marianne? Have you ever been to Abu Dhabi?
I haven't, no. I did go to the UAE back in 2001, I think it was, and I visited Dubai and Fujairah. So I've been to two of the Emirates, but not Abu Dhabi itself, although I have transited through the airport a few times over the years. And I have to say, it's never been somewhere that's on my radar before particularly, but after doing this interview with Keri, it definitely opened my eyes to what a great city it actually is to visit with kids. So hopefully we can help inspire a few more people today to go and visit.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Keri speaks, she's such an expert on the city. She knows so many places and so many ways of making it fun for kids. And I also think I would love to see the mosque. Yeah. I just have these images of the mosque in front of my eyes, like, oh God, that must be absolutely amazing. And I am tempted by the weather. I know in summer it gets intense, but I am really tempted by the idea of a city getaway in the heat, I have to say, or anyway in the sun.
Yeah, and it has some amazing looking hotels as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think for relaxation, like you go, beautiful hotel, pool, shopping, food. I think it can be a really relaxing, break from everything kind of holiday.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. So now, before we get onto our Abu Dhabi episode, each week on our podcast, we like to highlight a question or a discussion from our City Travel with Kids Facebook group that we think would be useful to our podcast listeners. Today's question is an excellent one. It says, we are visiting Florence soon and we are taking my parents along with us. My kids are 7 and 5 years old and I am worried about how we can please everyone. Do you have any tips for multi-generational city travel? What do you think?
Yeah, this is another big question, isn't it? I almost feel like we could have an entire episode on this one as well. But if we can just try and answer it briefly. It's quite a funny one. I kind of think, not being disrespectful to the elderly, but I do think quite often having kids and grandparents, they kind of have similar needs sometimes, in that they can only manage one or two things a day. They need to eat regularly. They need lots of rests. They always seem to need the bathroom. Sorry, I'm talking about my parents who are like that.
No, but it's funny because I thought exactly the same when I saw this question. And I thought actually, at least the way we travel with my parents, which happens quite often, we always have like a slightly more settled routine, regular meal times, slightly nicer restaurants, slightly nicer hotels.
Yeah, I just think you have to plan probably a bit more because regardless of age differences, you are a group. And so things like transport and accommodation and even like restaurant reservations and things, everything just requires a bit more planning because there's more of you.
Yes.
And the one thing I would say, and now I'm normally a hotel person, I'm not really much of an Airbnb person, but I do think in this situation, having a house or an apartment can be way easier. I think if you have that communal area to chill out in, nobody feels the pressure to stay up at night. You can put the kids to bed and you can spend the evening with your parents and nobody feels like they have to all meet on a schedule for breakfast because you can just come and go as you please a bit more easily.
I agree. And we've done that also with our parents. I have to say sometimes it also works for babysitting because if you're in an apartment all together, you kind of go, just pop out, for a quick drink maybe for the parents.
Sure.
And it's easy, because the kids may already be in bed. So there's no kind of effort for everyone, but you can have a little bit of downtime as well.
And I think also the other thing is not to feel that you have to do everything together. It's okay to split up and maybe the grandparents do one thing for the day or the girls go and do one thing for the day, or just you don't have to feel that everyone has to do everything together. You can go off and do your own thing based on your interests.
Yeah, that's good advice. I think it works with groups because then it leaves a little bit of space for everyone to just follow their own interests. And it's a holiday, so I think it's good to compromise on what everyone wants, but it's also right that everybody can just follow what they really went to see. It may not match what the grandparents want to do and the kids. I know sometimes we do have this afternoons, well, my parents would go maybe to museums and the kids are just tired and want to be in a playground, and that's fine too.
Yeah. And the final thing I would say is take lots of photos. Talking from someone who doesn't have their parents around anymore, I just think having those photos of your children with their grandparents is just so special. So just make sure you get lots of photos of those times.
Yeah, I love this tip. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it makes for great memories.
Yeah.
Now, let's focus on this week's destination city. Abu Dhabi is the capital of the UAE, although it often plays second fiddle to neighbouring Dubai. It's known for its glitzy day-to-night Formula One race and its stunning Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque that has graced many an Instagram account. But just how family-friendly is Abu Dhabi, and is it worth leaving the airport for a stopover? Earlier, Marianne sat down with our own Little City Trips editor, Keri Hedrick, to find out everything we need to know about planning a city trip to Abu Dhabi. Before we hear the interview, I just want to remind you that if you want to be kept up to date with all our latest episodes, then don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. And if you have any questions about Abu Dhabi after listening to today's episode, or you have any other family travel questions, you can come and chat to us in our Facebook group, City Travel with Kids. We would love to see you there. You can also find lots of information about Abu Dhabi on our family travel guide on the Little City Trips website. Finally, I want to let you know that we will be able to find a copy of our show notes from today's episode on our website at littlecitytrips.com/podcast. And we will link to any relevant and useful information mentioned in today's interview there. And one last request, if you like the podcast and you find it useful, we would love if you could leave a review for us on your favorite podcast player. This will help us being found by other parents who love to travel with kids and who may enjoy the podcast as well. Thank you. And now, Marianne, here's to you for your interview.
Today I'm chatting with Keri Hedrick, one of our co-hosts of the City Travel with Kids podcast and co-editor of littlecitytrips.com. Keri is also the blogger behind Our Globetrotters Adventurous Family Travel, which documents her own family's worldwide travels and countless hours spent on planes jetting around the world. Keri has called Abu Dhabi home since 2012 and also provides regional travel advice at her other website, Family Travel in the Middle East, as well as contributing to other publications. So I feel we are in pretty good expert hands today. Hi, Keri. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, thanks very much, Marion.
So, Keri, why don't you kick off with telling us a bit about yourself and your family and a bit more about your Abu Dhabi experience so far?
So, as you said, we've lived in Abu Dhabi since 2012. We relocated here when I had a toddler and a brand new baby. So we've been here coming up 7 years now. We've since gone on to have a third baby while living here, and we've travelled around the city, around the UAE and around the Middle East region extensively in that time.
That's great. So we're expecting some good insider tips from you today.
Yeah, I think what you'll find is Abu Dhabi is a city that's grown, even in the time that we've lived here, it's grown extensively and become even more accessible to families. So I look forward to sharing more with you about what exactly there is to do in Abu Dhabi.
That's great. Now, I know Abu Dhabi is often overshadowed by its glitzy neighbour, Dubai. So maybe you can share what you think makes Abu Dhabi a great city to visit with kids.
Sure. So what I'll do first is help everyone actually pinpoint Abu Dhabi on a map. So a lot of you, as you say, may have heard of Dubai before. It is the largest, tourism city in the Middle East region. Both Abu Dhabi and Dubai are cities in the United Arab Emirates, but Abu Dhabi is actually the capital of the UAE.
Okay.
And actually sits about 160 kilometres to the west of Dubai. It's a much smaller city than Dubai, but in my mind, I think it's the more beautiful and the more family-friendly city.
Oh, okay. I look forward to hearing why. Okay, now before we get into the details, can you share with us any essential information we need to know before we go? I'm guessing as you're based in the middle of the desert, there are definite seasons to avoid. And I know a lot of people can have concerns around the culture in the Middle East and things like dress codes and etiquette. So what should we know before we go?
Absolutely. So first of all, I think we'll head straight into the weather because that is a big concern coming into the UAE. It is in the middle of the Gulf, so the Arabian Gulf, which means that it does have desert conditions. So for about 6 months of the year, it's quite pleasant to visit. And for the other 6 months of the year, it's a little more challenging.
Okay.
So our summer runs, essentially, it starts sort of from March, April time. It starts to warm up. And from about May onwards, it's pretty hot. We're talking 40 degrees hot up to July, August, when you're talking up to 50 degrees.
Ouch.
Celsius. Yeah. And then what you find August, September time is the humidity also kicks in as well. So you have hot and you have humidity. It's not particularly pleasant when you're traveling with kids.
Wow, I can
But on the
imagine.
same token, yeah, it's not completely undoable because so much is inside. So you'll have a lot of places that are air conditioned. So if your flight is connecting through, say, in those hotter summer months, you can still stop for a couple of days and have a quite pleasant experience.
Okay, that's good to know.
But the best time is to come as it's starting to cool. So October, November into December, January is probably the best time of year to be visiting.
Okay.
Now let's head on to, you mentioned a lot about etiquette, culture and religion. It is a Muslim country. It's a Sunni Muslim majority, but a vast majority of the population of the UAE is actually expatriate workers. So you'll find the Emiratis themselves actually make up a very small percentage of the population. But a lot of those expatriate workers coming in are Muslim as well. So you get a lot of workers from other parts of the Gulf, from India, Pakistan. There's also a large Filipino as well as Westerner expats in the country. So you've got a real cultural mix to deal with, but you all fall under the Muslim laws.
Okay. So
what that means, for what it means for most visitors is a bit more etiquette is needed around the way you dress and the way you might behave. That might be slightly different to how you behave in your home country.
Okay, so no short shorts and strappy tops?
Absolutely. That's my top tip, is always try to think, have I got my shoulders covered? Have I got my knees covered? Okay. It's not a steadfast rule, but if you are out in a public place like a shopping mall, the police can arrest you for being underdressed. The reality is they probably won't. It's more likely someone might tap you on the shoulder and say, look, it's just not on. But for the most part, as long as you're covered, shoulders to knees, you should have no problem. Where you need to be more covered is if you are going into a religious or a government building. So if you are going into the Grand Mosque, which we'll get onto, you need to be completely covered head to toe with no skin showing. On the flip side, if you're staying at a resort, you're welcome to wear a bikini or bathers as you normally would at a resort, but certainly not down to topless bathing, skimpy G-strings. That would not be acceptable.
Okay, excellent. Wow, so much useful information there. And we have on littlecitytrips.com, we have a guide to what to wear in the UAE, I believe, that you wrote yourself.
Yes, Keri. I did write that myself based on years of experience going around the country. So we've got guidance on there for both men and women, and especially for children when it's appropriate for children to wear things. But as a general rule, the rule for children, they can wear what they want until they hit puberty. As soon as they hit puberty, the adult rules apply.
Okay, great. Right. Well, we will definitely link to that in the show notes, as I think that'll be super helpful, particularly if it's your first time visiting the Middle East. Okay.
Sorry, a few other things to think about before people come. Language is one. People get concerned about the language barrier, perhaps. You should know that everybody will speak English that you come across. Okay. So although Arabic is the national language of the country, most of the people you speak to in hospitality role, be it a taxi driver, the people serving you in restaurants or shops, they will all have at least a basic level of English, if not excellent English.
Okay, good to know.
And currency as well is the other one to know. The currency here is called the dirham, but it's actually pegged to the US dollar. So that makes it quite straightforward doing your calculations of what your money can buy. So $1 is 3.67 dirham at a fixed rate.
Okay, good to know. Okay, let's get on to the fun stuff. If we have 3 days in Abu Dhabi, what should we do with the kids? Talk me through your itinerary.
Okay, if you've only got 3 days, there's definitely things that you will need to leave out, or only, I guess, do a condensed version of, because in 3 days you cannot fit in much. The city itself, it's not as large a city as Dubai, so it makes it a little bit easier to get around, but you do still need to allow for travel times between things.
Okay.
So I think the most appropriate way to start would be to start at the Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque. It is undoubtedly one of the most beautiful buildings in the world, and it is completely free to enter. So Fantastic. It is an absolute first point I recommend to anybody. Will it keep the kids entertained? Probably for a while, but it's not, I guess, the most family-friendly of places to visit. It is fascinating for the adults, and I would certainly recommend for adults that you try and join one of the guided tours. They leave, I believe it's most days at 10, 11 and 5 p.m.
Okay.
So if you can try and get in early and get into one of those guided tours, they will actually talk you through the building, how it was made, where all the materials were sourced from. It's one of the most expensive buildings in the world because of the amount of resources and the craftsmanship that were put into it. But it's certainly a fantastic symbol of what the UAE is about, and it is named after the country's founding father, who was Sheikh Zayed.
Okay, so what are we doing next?
Okay, next we're going to head for lunch nearby. Immediately opposite the mosque, you'll have the Wayat Al Karama. It's a war memorial building, and it's got a lovely reflection pond there. From there, you can get some brilliant views looking back to the Grand Mosque, and you can then head on to the Ritz-Carlton, which sits along the waterfront, and they have got a place there called Venetian Village where you can grab a bite to eat from many of the eateries along the waterfront.
Okay, sounds good.
In the cooler months, you can head into Mushrif Park, which is sort of right in the centre of Abu Dhabi. Sorry, I should probably jump back and actually describe how the city of Abu Dhabi is set out. So the actual main part of Abu Dhabi is an island. So where you land, where the airport is all part of the mainland of Abu Dhabi. And then there is a series of islands that lie all around. The main one everyone just calls Abu Dhabi Island or On Island. And then there's a number of outlying islands as well. The main ones, which we'll touch on today, are Yaz Island and Saadiyat Island. So you're going to need to do a little bit of zigzagging around between these different places.
Okay, I had no idea there was so many islands to Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, I guess when you look on a map, it's not obvious as well. And when you're heading over the freeways and the bridges, you don't sometimes realise that you're actually heading over water and onto different islands.
Yeah.
A lot of it is reclaimed land as well, but naturally there's a lot of islands in the area.
Cool.
So in the centre of the main Abu Dhabi island, you will find Mushrif Park. That's one of our favourite places to go with the kids. It's got a little bit of everything. It's got botanical gardens in there, a petting zoo, a number of playgrounds, a small wadi. So if you're looking for somewhere to give, they've been very patient walking around the mosque all morning, it's a great place to then take them to stretch their legs a bit.
Can you just explain what a wadi is?
A wadi, yes, it's like a... Oh, you're going to ask me for the technical explanation now. I'll put that in the show notes for you. But it's a natural waterway, so it might not be full all year. But say you've got like a mountainous ravine, so when the water comes, the wadi will fill with water.
Oh, okay. And you can go swimming in there, can you?
Yeah, to an extent, you can splash in there. Okay. The one in the park is only quite small, but obviously if you head out to nature and into the mountains, you have very large fresh wadis.
Oh, cool.
After the kids have had a bit of a run around, we're going to take you to Etihad Towers observation deck. So if you've ever seen a picture of Abu Dhabi, quite often they show huge, big, sparkly, silvery towers. Mm-hmm. These are Etihad Towers. They're most famous if you've ever seen Fast and Furious 7 and they fly a car between the two buildings. This is the building that was filmed in. No. But so one for your movie buffs out there, if you want to have some practice before visiting Abu Dhabi, watch Fast and Furious 7. They've got some amazing scenery from around Abu Dhabi in that movie.
Cool.
So we're going to head up to the top, almost to the top of this building, and there's an observation deck there called Observation 300. And from there, you can get some spectacular views over the city, particularly down to Emirates Palace, which many people mistake as the presidential palace. It is not. It's actually a hotel. But now next door to Emirates Palace is the new presidential palace, which is called Qasr Al Watan. A magnificent, beautiful white building on the same kind of grand scale as the Grand Mosque, but it's down on this little peninsula on the end of Abu Dhabi Island. And yeah, heading up to Observation 300, you can get some amazing overviews of the new presidential palace.
Oh, cool. And for purchasing tickets for attractions like your observation deck, how's best to do that? Should we pre-book those online? Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, I always find it easier to pre-book tickets so you're not panicking or needing to line up on the day. So you can use an app like Get Your Guide to pre-purchase your tickets.
Okay.
But we tend to find that there's not normally huge queues for anything in Abu Dhabi. If you visit on a weekend, which I forgot to mention earlier, weekends in the UAE are Friday, Saturday, not the traditional Saturday, Sunday.
Okay, right.
So anything on a Friday and Saturday is likely to be busier than on a normal work day, which is Sunday to Thursday.
Okay, but generally not that crowded?
Generally not that crowded, not in the same way that you would find queuing in Dubai, just because it is a smaller city and there are less tourists here.
Okay.
So and the interesting thing about the presidential palace Qasr Al Watan, they have recently opened this up to tours to the public. So tickets are limited at the moment, but hopefully in the next couple of weeks I'm going to be checking out inside Qasr Al Watan, and when I do I will update on the website how you can go about purchasing tickets to get inside the presidential palace garden.
Wow, that sounds good. Okay, so what's next?
So after we have finished at the observation tower, you're probably coming, you can, if you're there for around sunset, that's a beautiful time to be there in the winter. If it's still slightly earlier in the day, I would recommend coming back to see the eastern mangroves. They run along the eastern side of Abu Dhabi Island. It's a beautiful nature spot, I guess, right in the heart of the city. From the mangroves, you can take either a small donut boat, which is like a small battery-powered eco boat through the mangroves, or the fitter of you might want to try kayaking. You can take a kayak, go look at some of the nature that surrounds Abu Dhabi city, and then come back into the Eastern Mangroves Promenade, and there's a number of restaurants along the waterfront there that you can watch the sunset.
Wow, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah, and I think Eastern Mangroves is one of those little hidden gems that people don't realise is actually there. Most people come flying up the freeway from Dubai to Abu Dhabi and don't stop to observe that it's actually one of the natural wetlands of the country.
Cool. Okay, so is that the end of day one?
That will probably, after you've done that much, you'll probably be finished for day one, yeah.
Excellent. What a fun start. Okay, what's next?
Okay, we're going to start day 2 by heading over to one of the islands I mentioned, to Saadiyat Island. It's a special area of Abu Dhabi they have set up to be the cultural district of Abu Dhabi. They have grand master plan that sees many museums being built on this island, but at the moment the only one that is open to the public is the Louvre. So the only Louvre you will find outside of Paris.
Oh, that's interesting.
But it is one of the most amazing, beautiful buildings you will see. It takes you through the history of humanity. It's really, really interesting displays. Will it be engaging for kids? Probably not the most engaging place, but certainly there's some tactics you can use to keep kids busy in places like this. In fact, I do believe we've got a guide on our website that people can download, how to keep kids amused in museums and art galleries and that sort of thing.
We do indeed, and we will link to that in the show notes.
And it's one of those places that if you want to enjoy it yourself, you probably need to find something like a scavenger hunt or a way to keep the kids amused so you can get through it.
Sure.
The reward at the end, though, is that there is a kids gallery at the end. Kind of once you've been through all the main galleries of the museum, there is a kids gallery at the end with some more interactive displays and things that they can do.
Okay, maybe don't tell them that at the beginning, because then
Don't
they'll
tell
just
them
rush
that.
through.
That's it. So it's not a supervised place. You can't go there, dump them at the start, and then have your own tour. You will need to take the kids with you. Okay. But you're right, that's certainly a good reward at the end. Uh-huh. And just coming into the central dome of the Louvre when you're finished is one of the most amazingly beautiful places I've visited. So yeah, that in itself will be really enjoyable for the kids as well.
Okay.
Now, depending how long you have spent there, you might have time to squeeze something else in before my next activity. It's on the history side of things again, Casa Al Hossein. It's one of the oldest I think it is the oldest standing structure in Abu Dhabi. It used to be a fortified building, and it's always kind of been at the centre of the city. They have very recently refurbished this and reopened it to the public. So if you want to learn a bit more about the history of Abu Dhabi and the city, how it came to be the modern day city that it is, that's a great place to go for a little history lesson.
Okay.
In the afternoon then, I would suggest another really interesting place to learn more about the UAE culture is to head to the Falcon Hospital. Now, the Falcon Hospital is slightly out of town. In relation to everything else, it's beyond the airport, so you will need a taxi or some sort of driving service to take you out there. And then they have time slots every day. So if you've been to the museum in the morning, then I would suggest you take the afternoon session at the hospital, which starts at 2 p.m.
Okay.
And then they take you on a 2-hour guided tour of all the facilities there. They explain why falcons are so important to the country, to the Bedouin people. And they'll actually take you through some of the aviaries. They will take you into the Falcon Hospital itself, show you how the animals are cared for. So a very low-key pace from the outside. You wouldn't know it was there, but one of the most fascinating cultural insights you will get to the original Bedouin people and what it means to them.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. My kids would love that.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you can get up so close and personal to the animals at the end of the tour, they put, I don't know what they're called, the thing they put on your arm so that the bird can sit on your arm. Kids can get a really hands-on experience and have their photo taken with the falcon.
Cool.
And then once you've got a little bit of a taster for desert life, my suggestion for finishing up day 2 is to take a late afternoon desert safari.
Yes.
So again, people may have heard of these before, but what this involves is normally you're picked up in 4-wheel drives from your hotel in the city. They then take you out to some of the sand dunes, which may be half an hour to an hour outside of the city, deep into the desert. They can do a variety of things. They can take you on a dune bashing, which is where they literally get the 4-wheel drives and they try and find the biggest bumps they can to throw you around, give you a bit of a thrill in the desert. If you are pregnant or with young children, though, that is not recommended. So this is really something for your 5+ kids.
Okay.
Because the cars probably will not come with car seats, and that is for the age group. They recommend not to try and do it with the young children. They can find you an alternative route into the camp that's not so bumpy.
Okay, sure.
Then at your desert camp, they'll have a huge range of activities on. You can have your camel ride. you can get traditional henna painting done on your arm. They might have the smaller quad bikes. So if you haven't been on the main dune bashing, you can get a smaller bike or get one of those fat bikes, the bicycles that have got the really fat wheels, and try and take the dunes on that way. Favourite with my kids is doing the sandboarding.
Oh, yeah,
So
fun.
sort of like what you would have for snow, but yeah, you actually go down the sand dunes. I will admit I wasn't brave enough to try it, but my kids loved it. Expect underpants full of sand at the end of this, but really good fun.
Oh, it sounds so much fun.
And then they'll finish off the evening by giving you a traditional Bedouin dinner in a desert camp setting where you're sitting on the ground. And they may even have belly dancing. They might have some traditional dancers come out and give you more of a taster of the Bedouin desert life.
Oh, so much fun. And are we spending the night there or do we go back to our hotel?
Some do give the option, but most will drive you back to your hotel that night, so
Okay.
door-to-door service back to your hotel. But you're talking about a late evening. So again, for the kids, it's a long day to take them out.
Sure. Okay, so
So
our
that's
final day.
our final day. We're going to do something completely different on day 3, and we're going to have a theme park day.
Ooh.
Now, many people might not be aware that Yas Island is basically the theme park central of Abu Dhabi. You have got some theme parks in Dubai as well, but we will touch on that when we do our Dubai episode. So in Yas Island, you've got the water park, which is Yas Water World. There is a Ferrari World, which has the fastest roller coaster in the world, and very recently opened is Warner Brothers World Abu Dhabi. All 3 of them state-of-the-art theme parks. So you could easily spend the whole day here, but what I would suggest is starting the day at Yas Water World. For most of the year, it's probably too hot to be outside in the peak of the day. So if you start your day there, by the time it's getting really hot, you can head to Warner Brothers World and Ferrari World, which are both entirely indoor theme parks.
Oh, okay, good to know.
Warner Brothers World is definitely our kids' favourite. Once your kids are over 1.10 metre, almost every single ride in the park they can do. So there's loads of everything from, the thrilling roller coasters and rides that throw you around. There's climbing activities, lots of miniature roller coasters, car type games. But the great thing that we've found is it's really not that busy as a theme park. And, unless you're going on an absolute peak public holiday, there's no lining up for the rides. Your kids can try their favourite things again and again. So,
oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, so for the quality of the theme park that it is, it's relatively crowd free. So
wow, that doesn't happen very often.
No, around the world, that's a very unfamiliar thing to see a theme park with no queues. But I guess that's the brilliant thing about the theme parks in the UAE is that they're just not that well known and that popular yet. So, yeah, you can definitely get some crowd-free rides. And the theme parks themselves are amazingly well put together, really well thought out. The character dress-ups are really good because, again, it's not so busy. They have the time to spend with each child and have their photo taken with them. Lots and lots of photo opportunities and lots of interactive shows as well where the kids can come up on stage.
Brilliant.
So in terms of theme parks, that's probably one of our favourite that we have done so far. Ferrari World is more for your older kids. So if you've got adrenaline junkies who like to do endless roller coasters, definitely Ferrari World's the one that they all want to hit up.
Okay.
The height limits there are quite a lot taller than some of the other theme parks. So really, until your kids are over about 1.30 meters, I probably wouldn't intend to spend too many hours at Ferrari World. They have a few things for the smaller kids, but it's really made for your teens, tweens, and adults.
Okay. So would you recommend? So doing the water park in the morning and then choosing one or the other for the afternoon?
I would suggest only choosing one. You could do all 3, and there are 3 park passes, but to try and squeeze them into one day, you wouldn't get the full experience at any of them. So, yeah, I would suggest starting at Yas Water World and then heading on to one of the other 2, depending on the age of your kids. Now, they're all based on, so Yas Island itself is kind of an island that's been made around the Yas Marina track, which is where the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix is held every November.
Oh, yes.
A lot of the hub of activity of Yas is actually around this marina racetrack. And the great thing is that they do a couple of nights a week. They do an open track night, which again is completely free to turn up to. So it's currently on a Sunday and a Tuesday night. You can turn up and they have bikes to hire there. Some are free. There's slightly better bikes you need to pay for. And you can do laps around the Grand Prix racetrack, or if you prefer, just walk or run around the track.
Cool.
But it's a great way to yeah, so if you're visiting outside of Grand Prix season, it's a perfect way to get a taster of the Grand Prix track.
That sounds awesome. Wow, this is great. I honestly had no idea there was so much fun to be had in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, that's it. I think Dubai perhaps does more marketing and more people seem to know what's there, but we've got a lot of fun in Abu Dhabi as well.
Yeah, it sounds like
the way I look at it, I guess you asked me at the start, what's the big difference between Dubai and Abu Dhabi? I think Dubai is the bigger, brasher, louder, we've got everything kind of city, whereas I think Abu Dhabi is more understated.
Uh-huh.
And what it does beautifully and does perfectly.
Great. Okay. I just had one other question about this itinerary. Because you mentioned going out to the Falcon Hospital. It was good to take a taxi. Is that the best way to get around? Is there a good public transport system, or how does it all work?
Yeah, there's not much in the way of public transport in Abu Dhabi. There is a bus system, but that is mostly used by local staff and local workers. It's not so much used by tourists. That's nothing like a metro or a train system. So my normal recommendation for families is it's easiest to get a taxi. So they're very easy to identify. They're all silver with a yellow top, and there's one phone number connects you to all the different taxi companies.
Okay.
They have an app you can download in advance for ordering taxis. And then in terms of private hire companies, Kareem is the main one that operates here. So again, I'll give you a link to put in the show notes for how to download Kareem app. And very recently, I believe Uber has been allowed back into the market. But that's one of those watch these spaces, because they did arrive and then they were banned for a while, but now they're allowed back again.
Sounds like London.
Yeah. So yeah, they're the easiest way to get around when you've got a family group is to hire a taxi. The cost is relatively inexpensive compared to many other cities around the world to get a taxi.
Okay, great. So do you think 3 days is a good period of time to stay in Abu Dhabi? Could we stay longer? And if we do stay longer, what are some other attractions we should consider?
I think if you only stayed for 3 days, you'd really only be getting a taster. And the problem with a taster is you might come away with the wrong impression of what a country is about and not have dug beneath the skin. So definitely I would recommend staying a week rather than 3 days if you want to experience everything the city has to offer. So in that very tight itinerary I gave you, we really didn't have much time for exploring the beaches and exploring some of the more outdoorsy areas. If I had longer though, the first thing I would do is head for a day down to Al Ain. So Al Ain sits about an hour and a half south of Abu Dhabi. And it's really the cultural part of the country. It's one of the original cities that existed, when Abu Dhabi was still a fishing village. Al Ain was actually a small town at that time, and that's where the country's founder, Sheikh Zayed, came from.
Okay. And should we do a day tour to get there, or?
Yeah, you can do a day tour, but it's one that with kids, you might prefer to move at your own pace. So it might be one that's worth hiring a car to drive out and self-touring yourself around with the kids.
Okay. And driving for tourists is okay, do you think?
Yes and no. I think it depends if you've got experience driving on the right side of the road. So our cars drive on the right with the steering wheel on the left.
Okay.
And the traffic does move at quite high pace. Saying that, if you're heading from the city into the outer, it's mostly freeway, so you've mostly got freeway traffic to contend with, but it does move quite fast and you do need to have good driving experience to hire a car.
Okay, yeah. My husband and I, before we had kids, we did some driving around the UAE and it was quite hairy.
Yeah, I think it's to some extent that's improved. So certainly the city driving has improved, but I wouldn't, for example, recommend someone to drive Abu Dhabi to Dubai unless they really knew what they were doing. The freeway systems can be confusing, and yeah, it does move fast.
Okay, good to know.
In LA, the main thing I would recommend for people to do is to go to the zoo there. Not only is it one of the most amazing sort of open plan zoos, they've also got the Sheikh Zayed Desert Learning Centre there, which is arguably, I think, one of the best history displays in the country. So it talks about everything from the geology of the country through to its recent history, through to the future of the UAE. So educational wise, as well as seeing the animals, it's a really fun place to go. That can take, the best part of a day, but there's also a number of museums to visit there. There's the Al Ain Oasis, which has been recently listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And then heading beyond Al Ain, if you've got a bit more time, you can head into the Empty Quarter, which is part of the largest sand-only desert in the world. So if you have those extra few days, yeah, definitely you can head down to Al Ain either as a day trip or continue on and spend some time down in the Liwa Desert.
Okay, and can we stay down there? Would you recommend maybe doing that, overnighting in Al Ain?
Yeah, you can overnight in Al Ain. There's a number of I would call 4-star resorts. They're probably not of the shiny quality of your Saadiyat type resorts, but there's definitely some fun kind of family resorts with swimming pools you can stay at down there. Another option, if you're heading over into the desert, one of our absolute favourites in the country is Qasr Al Sarab, and it is one of the most beautiful, luxurious desert hotels. In fact, you could even do that as an alternative to taking, we talked about doing a desert safari for an evening. You could perhaps do an overnighter down to Qasr Al Sarab, and they have a similar range of offering, but in a very luxurious, beautiful setting.
Oh, sounds like my kind of place.
Yeah. And then there's some other obvious options. If you've got longer, you can do day trips to Dubai. Again, if you've got kids that love their theme parks, Dubai Parks and Resorts is less than an hour's drive from Abu Dhabi. It sits on the Dubai border, so it's quite an easy drive up to do the Dubai Parks and Resorts.
Oh, that's handy.
And for those who like nature, you can always head further to the west and go out to somewhere like Banias Island, which again is like a big nature reserve, and you need to take a boat from the mainland, and you can stay overnight there as well.
Wow, this is all fabulous.
Yeah, so as I said, if you only got a taster, yes, you could probably see a few of the historic buildings around the centre of Abu Dhabi, the more modern buildings like the Louvre and Sheikh Zayed Mosque, but I would really allow a bit longer to head out to the desert and these more remote places to get a real feel for the country.
Okay, great. Okay, let's talk about family accommodation in Abu Dhabi then. Firstly, maybe you can advise the best areas to stay with a family, and then maybe recommend any specific family hotels that you think are especially good.
Sure. So as we talked about the layout of the city, there's lots of different places you could stay for different experiences. So if, for example, you were coming for just a short stopover and wanted to try the theme parks, I would stay on Yas Island itself.
Okay.
If you're coming for more of a beachy, resorty type trip, then I would head to the culture island, Saadiyat. Very recently, a lot of new resorts have opened. So I think there's now 5 beach resorts that are now opened along that strip.
Wow.
It's the only place that you will get stunning ocean views, completely out to uninterrupted views out to the Gulf and proper sand on the beach. So that would be my favourite if you're coming for a luxury beach type vacation.
Sure.
And then there are plenty of locations within the city that work very well. So quite near to where the Grand Mosque is, they have the Grand Canal, and along that Grand Canal, there is a number. You've got the Ritz, you've got Fairmont, Shangri-La, a few options along the canal front.
Okay.
And then staying down on the Corniche is also quite popular. So the Corniche is the main beachfront of Abu Dhabi Island, and along the beachfront there's numerous hotels there that are good options where, again, you can get some water views, some city views.
And how about budget options? Have you got any good recommendations if we can't afford any of the fancy hotels?
Yeah, I think one thing to mention is the fancy hotels here are far cheaper than you might get in other countries around the world. So although I've mentioned a lot of the kind of big brand names there in terms of the hotels, they might be surprisingly more affordable than if you were to stay at the same hotels in other countries. So certainly worth putting them into your search engine and seeing what options come up. But some of the better hotel chains in the centre of the island that are still good value are your likes of your Holiday Inn. There's a couple of Holiday Inns in the island where you can still get swimming pool and a variety of restaurants.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's now talk about my favourite topic, food.
Food. I knew you would want to know about the food.
How easy is it to eat out with kids in Abu Dhabi? And are there any standout family restaurants that you can recommend?
Sure. The great thing about Abu Dhabi is it's a very family-centric city. So pretty much any restaurant you turned up to with your kids, you'd be made to feel more than welcome. Most would have high chairs and the right sort of facilities. Some might even give you colouring and crayons. But for the most part, there's almost anywhere you could choose and feel welcome. So a lot of the restaurants are actually attached either to the shopping malls or they're attached to hotels. You don't get too many standalone restaurants, and this is mostly due to licensing laws.
Ah, okay, yes.
But if I was traveling with small kids, certainly going to one of the big they're not just food courts, I guess they're extensions of your normal food court where they have got beautiful restaurant strips, beautiful promenades, but they are attached to a shopping mall.
Okay, and you mentioned licensing. So are we okay to get a glass of wine with our meal?
Not at all places. So if it's a restaurant that's attached to a shopping mall, you will not. But if it's a restaurant that's attached to a hotel, then yes, you can get alcohol with your meal if it's a licensed hotel, which most of them are now.
Okay.
So if you're looking for something in particular that the kids will really enjoy, very popular here is to do Friday brunch. So Friday being our weekend here, they put on a big family spread at a lot of the big hotels on a Friday afternoon where you can try all different sorts of cuisines. They normally have a separate dessert room, kids entertainment. So if your trip happens to coincide with a Friday, that can be a really fun idea to explore.
And are these the brunches that come with free flow champagne?
They're the ones.
Okay,
yeah, they're the ones. There are some which are more focused on the drinking than the others. So you can find some which are dry, but most of them with the big family entertainment will have drinks flowing as well. And you have a choice of buying soft drink packages or alcohol packages.
Sounds good.
The other place I'd recommend for taking kids as well, if you're looking for a family-friendly environment, there's several golf clubs around the city, and the golf clubs tend to have, particularly in the winter, they'll have big open terraces where kids can have a run around at the same time as parents are having dinner, and child-friendly menus. So that would be my other top tip on where to dine with kids.
Okay, and you don't need to be a member to go there?
Not at all.
Okay, great. Okay, so before we wind up then, let's talk about packing for Abu Dhabi. Do you have any specific recommendations for any travel gear, any clothing, any accessories that will make our trip to Abu Dhabi with kids easier?
Yeah, as we mentioned at the start around conservative dress, so obviously when you're doing your packing, think about things that perhaps cover your skin a little bit more. And you'll find this isn't only about being conservative, it's about dealing with the heat and conditions as well.
Sure.
Even on a mild day in the winter, it's still hot out in the sun during the day, so having a longer sleeve shirt on will keep your skin protected. The other thing I recommend for ladies as well is to come with some sort of scarf or wrap. You can pull this over your head if you ever feel uncomfortable. So to be clear, it's a country where you do not have to have a covered head. But if you are heading into a religious building or you ever feel uncomfortable, it's always nice to be able to pull that over your head. And the other reason for using it is dust as well. So quite often it can be dusty out and windy, so it's nice to have that option, particularly if you're going out for a desert safari. In terms of general packing, sandals and flip-flops are normally the way to go. If you're heading out to the desert, you might want to bring both trainers and flip-flops. So you can wear trainers for doing things like the sandboarding and camel riding, but change into your flip-flops when they're completely full of sand. And also, even though it is a very hot country, still bring a cardigan or a wrap with you, because you're inside so much of the time. It's actually freezing inside most of the time. So yeah, most of the year you will find, because the locals, wear full length garb, they actually keep the inside of buildings quite cool. So yeah, no matter what time of year, you can expect it to be sort of 22 degrees inside a building, which might be a bit chilly if you've just come from the beach.
Sure, very useful to know.
In terms of guidebooks, honestly, it's something I probably wouldn't invest in, just because the city changes so rapidly. If you buy a guide to the city and it says what's open or these are the opening times, it could well have changed by the time you get to the city. So I would rely more on online resources. Even the Visit Abu Dhabi website isn't always as up-to-date as it could be. So, yeah, definitely worth Googling and getting some of these answers before you travel, just to make sure you've got the most accurate information.
Good advice. And, of course, our own family travel guide on littlecitytrips.com, which I'm hoping you will keep up to date.
I will. So, yeah, certainly things like the new presidential palace opening has come up since we first published our city guide, and we'll be updating all that sort of information, and where opening times change or a new theme park opens. All that sort of information will be kept up to date on the Little City Trips website.
Right, sure. And of course, we will also link to our packing list, which Keri put together with lots of useful ideas of what you need to put into your suitcase. Okay, so we'd like to finish our podcast interviews with a quick fire round of questions about your city. Keri Hedrick, are you ready?
I am ready. Let's go for it.
Okay, number one, tell us one hidden gem we won't find in the guidebooks.
I think we mentioned this in our itinerary, Mushroof Park in the centre of the island. Mm-hmm. It actually changed its name to Al Emirat Park in the guides, but most of us who've lived here for a number of years still call it Mushroof Park. But it's definitely my hidden gem, where just to let the kids run around and have a pleasant spot to stay in the centre of the city.
Okay. And one thing we should splurge on?
I would definitely recommend spending the money to go to the theme parks on Yas Island. As I mentioned, there's hardly anywhere else in the world you can go visit theme parks of that quality and not have to queue up that much. So I think they're definitely worth the money.
Sounds like it. Okay, one thing we should save our money on.
The only thing that's really expensive here, as I said, I think generally it's actually quite a cheap city in relative terms to other cities, because a lot of things are free. But I would probably save your money on any of the fine dining. If you're here with kids, then it's not much value. You do get value from things like the Friday brunches, but most of the fancy restaurants in the evening, I'm not sure that you get your best value for money for kids.
Okay. One app we should download before we go.
There's something here called The Entertainer. And The Entertainer has loads of 2-for-1 vouchers and discount vouchers on probably most of the attractions that you would want to come and see in the city. So definitely download The Entertainer. It's free to download the app, but to actually purchase the product, you have to spend a few hundred dirham.
Okay. And finally, where will we get our playground with a coffee and a view?
I've actually touched relatively little on the Corniche, but the Corniche beachfront, which runs all the way along the city, has a new area called Al Bahar. And at Al Bahar, there's almost like little food trucks there, and there's an enormous big new adventure playground. So definitely you can grab your coffee, let the kids play and watch the sun go down on the Corniche.
Amazing stuff. It all sounds fabulous, and you've definitely convinced me that Abu Dhabi is worth a visit and that there is more to the UAE than Dubai.
Absolutely. And that's what I hope more people do, is perhaps choose Abu Dhabi as their stopover city rather than Dubai.
Well, let's hope so. Keri, thank you so much for sharing your home city with us today and for all your amazing insider tips. Now, Keri has shared more of her local intel in our Abu Dhabi family guide on littlecitytrips.com. And if you have any specific questions after today's interview, you'll find Keri hanging out in our Facebook group, City Travel with Kids, where she will be more than happy to chat with you. Keri, quickly tell us where else we can find you.
Sure. So I run a couple of other websites as well, which are very Middle East focused. I have one called Family Travel Middle East, and that entirely focuses on the UAE and the Middle East region. You can find that online, familytravel-middleeast.com. And the other site that I've run for a number of years is one called ourglobetrotters.com. And that talks all of it, not just our UAE and Abu Dhabi adventures, but everywhere me and my family go around the world. You can find us under Our Globetrotters at Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and our main website, ourglobetrotters.com.
Okay, thank you, Keri. So that concludes our Abu Dhabi episode. Don't forget that you can find our show notes for today's episode at littlecitytrips.com/podcast. And we will have links to everything Keri talked about today there. I hope you found today's podcast helpful and inspirational. And we'll be sharing loads more city insider tips with you in future episodes. So please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Until next time, happy travel planning.